back to another episode of Digitally Transformed. I am your host, Melissa, and let's get to it. Today we have a very special guest, Brian Smith. He is a senior advisor here at Infused Innovations and works very intimately with our clients. He's been in IT for over 25 years, with over 13 of those years as an IT manager or IT director.
Hey, Melissa, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Today, I wanted to talk all about digital transformation, which, as you know, is something that we talk a lot about. It is quite literally the name of this podcast. So let's get into it. Brian, last year you wrote an article for the National CIO Review about the dangers of the phrase, "We've always done it this way." How do you think that article and digital transformation cross paths?
We've seen so much digital transformation during the last year and a half of the pandemic. Every business has had to pivot to this new normal. And basically, a lot of organizations just said, oh no, we need something digital to survive. And so they just went, buy it, let's go buy it, and let's go. And oh, by the way, I need that Monday. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. So
Right.
I would actually classify a lot of what we've seen, though, as wasn't digital transformation. It was more what I like to call digital shoehorning.
Oh, I've never heard of that. What's digital shoehorning?
Yeah, well, so most organizations, whether they're large, whether they're small, they really have just added digital solutions to how they've always done things. And they didn't transform during the process. They try to take solutions like Microsoft Teams and kind of shoehorn them into exactly how they were working when everybody was in the offices and their employees could collaborate in person. And basically, they were essentially just doing kind of what they've always done.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Digital transformation is so much more than, just implementing technology. It is a huge, major mindset and business shift, and that has to come along with that transformation. So talk to me about the dangers of, the quote, "We've always done it this way." How does that apply here?
Well, so to first understand that, I like to back up and give everybody a little quick history lesson about someone who is hugely influential in modern computing, and that's Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. I love Admiral Hopper. I could talk about her for a really long time, but here, let me just throw out some relevant highlights, mainly because we should all be talking more about this pioneering woman and a lot of other pioneering women at the time, when women weren't really in this field. And the only times they were in this field is when they were actually the computers themselves, for those of you who've seen the movie Hidden Figures. So like back in the 1940s, after she earned like a master's and a PhD in math from Yale, she was one of the first three programmers of the famous Mark I computer, kind of like the granddaddy of them all. And she even wrote the manual for it, which, if I recall, was like 560 pages, something like that.
Wow.
In the 50s, she worked on the UNIVAC computers, again, pioneering computers in our time. And she developed the first compiler that allowed that translation of mathematical code to machine code to kind of get away from punch cards. And she's widely recognized for her work in designing COBOL, which was the first real computer language. She's often referred to as Grandma COBOL. And she retired and she was pulled back to active duty. And she worked into her 80s.
Wow.
She was an amazing woman. But the one thing I really love about her, and I think is the lasting impression that she's made, as if everything else that we talked about wasn't enough, and there's plenty more where that came from, was she was a mentor and really an inspiration to those she taught and trained. And the famous quote that's attributed to her is, "The most dangerous phrase in the language is, 'We've always done it this way.'" And I've used that quote as like a guiding principle throughout my career, especially when I look at digital transformation.
Really cool story. And I love that mantra, "We've always done it this way." It really implies that there are other ways to do things. But tell me how you see the quote, "We've always done it this way," in relation to what we're talking about, which is digital transformation.
The key word in digital transformation, whether the phrase or our podcast, is not digital. It's transformation. It actually implies that you've changed something. And, has your organization taken a step back and looked at what your needs really are? Is the current solution that you shoehorned in to fulfill those needs back a year and a half ago working well, or just sort of working? It requires honest conversations internally with managers, with stakeholders, and other leaders in the organization. And you really need to talk to the staff that's on the front lines doing the day-to-day work and find out what's working and what's not. Basically, it requires being bold.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense too, with chatting with people who are doing the day-to-day things, asking their opinion, what's working, what's not working, what's been frustrating, how can we simplify things, how can we make, systems more efficient, how can we automate things, and being able to have that leader mindset of, like you said, being able to talk to everyone in the organization, the people who are really putting in that day-to-day work. And there is so much that goes into transforming your organization. And I know that with that, a lot of people don't really know where to start. So what are some areas that you think organizations can look at?
How about meetings? I mean, basically, do you still try to have the same meetings that you normally did before the pandemic in the exact same way you did it? Do they say that the definition of insanity is it's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results?
Yes.
So rather than doing that, you could leverage tools like Teams to work in a more asynchronous way, for example, and use posts and chats to help reduce that dreaded Zoom fatigue. That so many people experience.
Right.
Since everyone is no longer in that same physical space, all those fortuitous meetups you might get in the halls, or the drive-bys, as I call them sometimes, those aren't happening. So are you using tools in addition to Teams like Planner or Lists or To-Do to help better monitor and assign tasks? So if you aren't using tools in more meaningful ways, then you basically pulled we've always done it this way. With so much upheaval that's occurred in the last 18 to 20 months, there are a lot of opportunities that your organization can really capitalize on.
Right.
As much as you need to do some things the same way for people, so that way people, your staff has some semblance of normalcy in really unnormal times that we are in. That same upheaval means that there's some opportunity for more drastic change. Your staff might be more willing to experiment with these new opportunities and these new tools, and you have to make sure that the staff, are really part of this process, not just using the tools and doing the work, quote unquote, but really helping to find ways to do the job better and to collaborate better. It's really a team effort to figure out what works best, since we're all in similar situations, but we are still in, we might still be in different boats right now, but we still all have similar situations and we still have that unique home situation. And, there's a lot of complexities that surround this. So using everybody within your organization really contributes and allows you to see that larger picture.
Wow. I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying. And I think with all of these on normal times right now, employees and just people in general are more willing to try new things or different ways of work, modern work. Like that is something that I know a lot of organizations are exploring and employees want to explore. A lot of people want to work from home right now.
Exactly.
Do you have any other tips on where organizations can look besides just meetings for where to start?
In step 5 of that article you mentioned that I wrote, I talk about how you should question everything. And it's an over-exaggeration, but it really still totally applies to this situation. You really need to find the thought leaders in your organization. And the note on that is they may not be in management, and have those thought leaders weigh in and lead some change. And that key here, again, is to get buy-in at all levels. That's how these tools work and are successful. And a good way to do that is to have voices speaking from all levels. And it doesn't have to be a massive change to start. Like everybody looks at this and says, oh, I need something big and transformative. You could start off with something simple, like using the approval process tool that's in Teams. your staff already did this process physically, by walking the piece of paper around the office to get signatures or sending emails, and then they go off into the ether and you may not know the status of what's happening to them. It's not a massive change, and that approval process can be done at a really basic level if necessary, if you don't have the resources or you just don't think you have the time. But by putting that in place, it's a nudge. It's a decision essentially to take the left fork in the road rather than the right. And from that first small change, I think you can really start to build momentum, and people will really start to see we can do this. And start looking at the structure you've built in teams. Look at the names of the teams, the number of teams that you have. Do they all just have a general channel and nothing else? Who are the owners? Do they actually all have owners? That's a really important step in governance. Speaking of governance, did you put any governance in place when you rushed to get set up and get up and running to be remote come Monday? Or was it a bit of the wild, wild west for the last 18 months? And if it was the wild, wild west, it's okay.
I think that's a lot of organization.
Yeah. I mean, that's most organizations are in those shoes. So don't worry. It's not like you're unique and you've screwed yourself. It's you're okay, but might need to look to get some assistance to help figuring this out. I would recommend reaching out to a trusted consultant like us at Infused Innovations to really help guide you through some of those best practices and to find the unique approach that works well for your organization. Teams is a great tool. As an example, it has tremendous flexibility, and it's a blessing and a curse sometimes. The blessing is that you see it and you're like, I can do all this stuff with it. The curse is I can do all this stuff with it. So it feels overwhelming. But to me, that blessing is it is incredibly flexible, and there's some basic best practices out there to do. And then you find the best practices that work well for your organization. And then, once you get past that, make sure that your IT staff is kind of always reading up on what's new in Teams or other tools in 365. Or if you're too small and you don't have a dedicated IT staff, designate a person in your organization that can really envision those opportunities and can see potential. 365 is constantly changing. And it's hard for even us to keep up sometimes with all the different changes. But I really guarantee that if you go and look at the roadmaps for any one of these tools, there will be something on that roadmap that's going to elicit kind of like a, wow, we could really use that. I can't wait till that comes out reaction. And you can start planning for it. It's basically, I'm just trying to encourage everybody to channel your inner Grace Hopper and don't fear change.
That makes so much sense, Brian. I will post your article for those who have not read that yet in the description of this podcast episode. And I really appreciate all of the analogies and the simple examples that you gave us here. I think that so many of us can relate to what you're saying. And I know that a lot of people are going to find some value in what you just shared with us.
Yeah, anytime. It's great to be here on the podcast.